Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up on Dialogue, the U.S. Supreme Court rules that a North Idaho couple can take the EPA to court. You'll get the chance to vote on a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to hunt. And the governor signs a new law regulating oil and gas drilling. It's been a big month for environmental stories in Idaho, but we've got you covered with our Reporter Roundtable next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. It's time for a monthly Reporter Roundup, and today I'll be speaking with journalists who follow environmental and outdoor stories. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so to speak, so I want to get right to introducing my guests. Joining me from our Moscow studio on the campus of the University of Idaho is Eric Barker, who covers environmental and outdoor stories for the Lewiston Tribune. It's really nice to have you with us, Eric.
Hi, Marcia. It's nice to be here.
And here in Boise is yet another Barker, but no relation to Eric, Rocky Barker from the Idaho Statesman, a longtime environmental reporter there. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Marcia.
Also joining us is Kimberlee Kruesi. Kimberlee is the environmental and health reporter for the Twin Falls Times-News. It's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you.
And last but not least, our own Aaron Kunz, a reporter for EarthFix, a joint project between public television and public radio stations in the Northwest, including Idaho Public Television. Welcome.
Thank you.
So what environmental stories are you following? Give us a call toll-free at 1-800-973-9800. First to you, Rocky. There's been a lot of talk about the U.S. Supreme Court this week having to do with health care, but the prior week, the court actually ruled on a case involving a North Idaho couple who wanted to develop some property near Priest Lake in North Idaho and had been told by the EPA that it was wetlands and that they could not. And the couple wanted the right to take the EPA to court to do some discovery and get a ruling, and the U.S. Supreme Court says, in fact, that the couple can. Now, this case has been watched by a lot of conservative commentators in particular who are unhappy with the EPA. So there's some political ramifications to it, but also some procedural ones, yes?
Well, I will tell you, the people who are almost as happy as the Sacketts about this are lawyers, because this will provide a lot of work for lawyers in cases where people who had previously simply been ordered to stop building and put their wetlands back the way they were. Well, now, if they think the area isn't a wetlands, they can go to court and make a case.
Or any compliance order for that case.
That's right.
I mean, a compliance order.
Under the Clean Water Act.
So some people say that this will slow down the process quite a bit.
Well, it could. But in the end, it really doesn't change the procedure. It only provides this legal maneuver, legal opportunity here. In the end, I think, though, that the people who will stop it will be the people who might have a case. It won't stop. I don't think it's going to be like, for instance, environmental cases that stop something from going on. People, in the end, they're either going to get to build their houses or not.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see whether this case is resolved out of court. That'll be interesting to watch. And on to another issue involving water, the Salmon River and dredging for gravel. The State Land Board approved another extension of a lease to do this gravel dredging in the Salmon River. Quite controversial, more than 400 comments against it, but the Land Board decided to go with it. Eric?
Yes, they did, Marcia. Something to note here is that this operation has been going on since 1955, so nearly 60 years. It happens below the ordinary high water mark, but not when it is actually wet. So the miner removes gravel, hauls it on above the high water mark and processes it, and then the high flows of spring runoff replenish the gravel bar. But yes, it is quite controversial. A lot of people think there are a lot better places to get gravel than the Salmon River, but the Land Board did not agree.
There is a gold mining operation there that people would see as they pass by as well, is there not?
Yes, almost directly across the river there is a relatively new gold mining operation that's also quite visible. It's a new thing. I'm learning about it kind of as we speak, and may do some reporting on it soon.
Okay, well, we'll look for that. One major project that has been delayed by an agency is the China Mountain proposed wind project, which would have been the largest wind power project in the state. It has been delayed by the BLM because there are sage grouse leks in that area. Yes?
Yeah, this area was determined as a high priority area for sage grouse, and in the BLM's attempt to protect that habitat, they decided to delay this major wind project. It upset a lot of county commissioners.
Did it?
It did, and a lot of people thought that this was going to be a chance for more economic development, for the counties, for that area, bring in money. But at the same time, this is where the sage-grouse habitat is at.
And why is that so important? What is, they're not listed as endangered, but why are projects being stopped by sage-grouse?
Well, because they're going to decide by 2015 whether in fact to list them as endangered, and they've already been listed as endangered, but that other things were more important, had a higher priority. So they've got to do something now to protect and expand habitat.
So is the idea that the wind turbines would damage the sage-grouse habitat?
Well, that
or the roads to go in.
That's
to
right.
build
All
everything.
the attention. I mean, basically, it's like a lot of places. It's pretty pristine, and suddenly there'd be a whole lot of people in that area, and that's. It's one of what I think are the beginning of a lot of projects like that. Another one that's on probably on the chopping block is a new airport for the Wood River Valley.
Right, to replace Friedman. So let's talk about wind power in general. There was talk of a moratorium on wind power. Wind power seemed like it was the next best thing when it came in. Why are people wanting to stop it now that moratorium didn't happen?
Right. Well, I think first off the bat, Idaho Power has had a big push against renewable energy, wind power being primary in that. They've gotten a lot of incentives from federal and from the state to come here and develop in the state of Idaho. So we've had a lot of increase in the number of turbines.
Right,
the industry has.
And Idaho Power has a concern
because the federal mandate requires these utilities to purchase renewable energy from qualifying facilities. And because they have so much more in there, they have to take that into consideration in their integrated renewable resources plan. And that comes as a bit of a concern because they say some of that cost will end up being passed on to the consumers.
And there's some starting to be some pushback from people as well about seeing wind turbines near them. Right?
I think depending on where you live, you're starting to see some pushback. I was in East Idaho just this past weekend. We see a lot of big signs out there saying that wind energy just isn't for us. But I think that's because it's in their backyard. They see that every day, and we're not in a small area where they see the tangible results, which is a lot of influx of new jobs, seeing that money firsthand. What you see is along the ridge in Idaho Falls is all of these big wind turbines, and for a lot of people who come to the state of Idaho, it's changing a way of life, that they really relish here.
But people are counting on it for economic development, are they not? So when these
projects, it does bring in jobs, and but at the same time, like you're saying, that people are throwing up wind turbines when they weren't there, and so people are kind of afraid of maybe it's affecting their property value.
Or we know that it affects bats, for instance, and some birds who can fly into them. Well, we'll follow that on another energy-related issue, oil and gas drilling. We now have a law that was signed by the governor that regulates this industry, and there's been great concern, and you've reported on air, and you have too, Rocky, about the taking away of local control. For instance, Washington County passed its own ordinance saying, we want to be in control of these things. Where do you think this is going? Because, this vote was deadlocked at one point in the Senate, right? And didn't Lieutenant Governor have to break the tie?
Well, he broke the tie actually to send it for amendment, and then they did another quick procedure a day or so later
but there's a lot of concern
put it back the other way.
That this setting state regulations would supersede locals who may not want fracking, as it's been called.
Right. Now, first people have to understand they're not going to do fracking as is going on in the east and in other places. That's right. In that same way, that horizontal high pressure pumping of water and stuff down deep into the rock, but they are going to do smaller pressure, what they call wellhead stimulation. because we're in a sandstone environment over there. But people are worried about water. I mean, like always in Idaho, people care about water. And the people over there were not convinced the state was going to take care of that. And then they also didn't like the idea that there might be drill heads right next to them. The state has tried to assure them that's not going to happen, and they have done some compromises, but everybody kind of agreed at the end of the session they might have to come back next year and do some more about this. But we're going to hear some things in the next 2 weeks. It's going to be very interesting to see whether, in fact, this new industry takes off, as they say.
What do you mean by that?
I think that the industry is going to make announcements here in the next few weeks about new drilling, new production. We have production wells waiting to go into production. And that's jobs, that's money, there's a lot of excitement in it.
One of the big concerns, though, I think that Rocky didn't talk about is the fact that some counties, like Washington County, who came up with their own county ordinances regulating this, feel like the state, by passing a law like this, if they do, would basically step on their right to control what happens in their county. And their county commissioners felt like the Idaho Association of Counties, who helped wrangle up this deal with the industry, felt like they didn't have a say. Mm-hmm. And so that's their concern from that standpoint.
And we had some conflict of interest issues come up on this bill as well.
That's right.
With Monty Pierce, who turns
Senator
out to
Pierce.
own some rights.
Senator Pierce, but he waited until the very last vote to tell everybody that he had so he'd leased some of his land for oil drilling, and today in the legislature, the Senate passed new ethics rules that will now make secret all ethics investigations until there's a vote. But it also made it very clear that senators are supposed to announce their potential conflicts in committee early. So there was a compromise that both sides could buy onto.
Well, I'm sure that this issue will continue. I want to get, though, to what I believe the Speaker of the House has said to you is one of his great accomplishments this session, and that is it will be on the ballot, a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to hunt, which will say, in part, the rights to hunt, fish, and trap, including by the use of traditional methods, are a valued part of the heritage of the state of Idaho and shall forever be preserved for the people and managed through the laws, rules, and proclamations that preserve the future of hunting, fishing, and trapping. Eric, up north, I assume that this amendment will be favored by the constituents there. Why is it needed? Is there a threat to hunting?
Well, there's no current threat to hunting or fishing, but there's a fear there may be in the future. I talked to former Senator Gary Schroeder, and he referenced the mid-90s attempt by referendum to end bear baiting and hunting bears with hounds. He thinks maybe the same thing could happen with wolves, that maybe some out-of-state groups, as he said, would fund a referendum drive in-state to end wolf hunting, and he says this kind of thing will stop that. But there is no current great threat to hunting, but I think a lot of senators and representatives saw this as protecting for the future.
And would bring some people out to the polls, I'm sure, as well.
Absolutely. I think one of the things this is going to do is there's going to be a lot more hunters. The last time hunters came out to the polls in big numbers, Helen Chenoweth got elected in part because of their interest. They came out for that bear baiting referendum.
I well remember it. The most amount of calls that we ever received on a dialogue show was on that bear baiting. And speaking of that, we do have some calls lined up right now. Let's talk to Tom and Haley. Tom, go ahead, please. Tom? Tom, are you there?
Reference these places. You should locate them. Like for
okay,
instance,
Tom, go ahead. Repeat your question because we didn't quite hear you from the top. Go ahead.
I'm making a comment that when you reference these places, like for instance the gravel mining in the Salmon River, you need to locate that.
Okay.
The Salmon's a damn long river.
It's on Highway 95, right outside of Riggins. Am I right? Eric, thank you very much.
It's closer to Whitebird, but
between
yes.
Riggins and Whitebird, on the left-hand side of the road as you're driving north. So that's where you'll find that, and that's a very good point. I thank you, Tom, for making me do that. I was remiss. Dan in Salmon. Dan, go ahead, please.
Hi, this is a call for Rocky. we've been following House Bill 464 very closely up here, and aware that it has been signed by the governor. The concern is that, first of all, the House bill denies due process to the public, and by essentially preempting local government from any involvement with limited authority of the Local Land Use Planning Act. The concern is, in this part of the country, is that it what precedent does it set for future legislation in preempting authority of local government control?
Basically, it doesn't set a precedent for other things.
Thank you, Dan.
What's fascinating is that the legislature goes back and forth on this issue, on issues like the wind technology or like transmission lines. They are making sure the counties, they'll fight to the end on this. This one was different, though, because the Oil and Gas Commission already had a process, and the industry itself just made it very clear that they could not do their business. And I'm not sure that that's going to hold if they do a poor job of it. Wouldn't you say so?
I would definitely agree. If they don't do it right, it's going to reflect poorly on, and they'll overturn it, and that's not to benefit to the industry. So I think we really want to take it slow and make sure that they get it right. And I say, don't say slow as in let's wait another year or two, but let's make sure we get the due process in there.
Sure.
Let's take a call from up north in Sandpoint. Scott, go ahead, please.
Hi, I want to address the Hackett case up here in Sandpoint, Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I'll tell you, one thing that really bothers me is that most people that are this environmental movement forget the fact that we have the Constitution of the United States, which protects property rights, which protects these folks from these overbearing environmental laws, which most cases involve, like Rocky Barker, in every environmental case, these people are going to fight tooth and nail to destroy any human aspect of the environment. And what it amounts to is a trampling of the constitutional rights.
So you are supportive of the decision?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's get some comments here. Now, I know, Rocky, the court did not rule on the due process claim that the Sacketts had, that their due process was violated. They ruled very narrowly on a procedural issue. That's
right. They still said that the Constitution allows the government to enforce its Clean Water Act, but they ensured that, like he said, that if you've got a right to a redress, to make sure that they're enforcing it right, rather than just simply having a compliance order.
Scott's feeling is...
Marcia,
yes,
this is Eric up in Moscow. Just an interesting side note is that Justice Alito wrote that there is a lot of confusion about where the Clean Water Act applies and where it doesn't. And he sort of admonished Congress and said, hey, you guys could clear this up by defining what is waters of the U.S. So the Clean Water Act says you can't discharge pollutants into the waters of the U.S., but there's no definition. So that's something that could happen in Congress. I don't think there's a move to do it, but it would perhaps clear up a lot of the controversy.
Well, as I mentioned before, Scott's sentiment is shared by a lot of people. The EPA is certainly an agency now that's under a lot of scrutiny, and people will be pointing to this decision to vindicate their feelings about the agency from a political standpoint. I would be remiss if we didn't move on to talk about wolves. Lots of news on wolves up in your area, Eric. Some were killed by aerial gunning in the Lolo area by the state. Bag limits for next year's season have been increased, and so there's a sense that more needs to be done to control wolves, but at the same time, Senator Sidaway had a bill that he had to pull because it would have allowed many more kinds of eradication, and that was, in some respects, people felt going too far.
That bill was kind of a moment where, they all kind of sat down and reflected and said, look, we actually did a pretty good job here. We have control of our wolves now. We need to exercise good judgment so we keep control. And then the Fish and Game Commission immediately came back and said, let's up the numbers. We'll take we hear you, legislature. We want to get more wolves shot. And there's a lot of people who don't like it, but
Well, and there's some
still fits the law.
Controversial photos out there right now of trapping of wolves. Eric, anything you want to say about wolves before we move on?
Well, just that I think some of the unease from people on the wolf advocate side is that the Fish and Game hasn't set a sort of a target population. It is said that it wants to stay well north of the 150 or 100 that might trigger relisting, but it hasn't said what that sort of comfortable cushion would be, and that might be adding to some of the consternation. But Fish and Game officials tell me they don't think they're anywhere near it, and that there's room for this harvest to continue. And next year, those that are very successful or very skilled will be able to take up to 10 wolves apiece, 5 through hunting and 5 through trapping.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see the numbers there. Kimberlee, on to another important species fish, and in this case, fish that are commercially grown. You've been covering quite closely a story that really is a precedent-setting and landmark agreement between fish farms and water districts.
Groundwater districts particularly.
And explain to the viewing public what this agreement is about and water rights and how it might solve some problems.
Well, before the fish farms and the groundwater districts, whenever they felt like maybe their water rights were being abused, they would go to court and they would get caught up in a legal battle. This was quite different. It was settled outside of court, and they were able, groundwater districts were able to say, look, like, we will buy your water rights, we'll buy your facilities, and the fish farm said, yeah, let's do that. And this is going to have a major impact. It's a major influence of being like, okay, maybe we can settle our differences outside of court. And
it's huge because there's always been this controversy over what's called conjunctive management. How does groundwater affect surface water? You know, the sprinkler irrigation affect the level of the waters for the fish farms. So it's been in court for a long time.
It has.
And the people that are the fish farms are okay with being bought out or bought in part by
Kay Hardy, the president of Blue Lakes Trout, who owns the 3 fish farms involved in this deal, is ecstatic about this. She's fair, and she told me that this is kind of like she wanted to be an innovator on this kind of issue, and they just so they could set this precedent and be like, look, like, these kinds of battles can be settled outside of court, and we can move forward and have a partnership on this.
Rocky, you've been covering the Snake River adjudication for 20 years?
25 years,
yeah.
That's right.
So how seminal is this?
This is really big. This, just remember, it was 5 years ago, we were talking about shutting down thousands of acres of farms. And Kay's sale, Kay Hardy from Boise, her sale really essentially resolves this issue. And all of the other things that have played. Now there's one last court case that's got to go through the Supreme Court, but we are largely at the end of a 25-year battle over.
So why didn't this happen earlier?
Water rights. Well, it took a long time, and these things take a long time. I mean, water is a big deal for us.
What's the import of water districts owning fish farms?
Well, they're not gonna run fish farms. They're going to use the water on their crops.
But will there be enough water for the fish? Like, apparently they.
Well, there'll be other fish. See, there's other fish farmers there, and they get to keep their water, and they'll keep operating. And
but these fish farms will go.
These fish farms will close.
Okay.
But it really is good for the economy, and this is the thing that we get a whole lot more economic development out of the water that goes on the farms than we did for those fish farms. So it was very important that we worked it out this way, and it was always kind of there. But private property rights are private property rights, and the fish farmers they're fish farmers. They didn't want to give it up unless they were, treated fairly. That's exactly right.
Well, speaking of fish, Aaron, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about a documentary that you're working on for Idaho Public Television involving salmon. Now,
sockeye salmon.
There's been so much done. Talk about what your documentary will cover that's new.
Well, really, it's a real interesting view of Idaho's endangered sockeye salmon. And, for many, many, many years, in fact, Idaho Public Television has tried to do a documentary like this for many, many years before I got here. But the problem was, and Rocky knows this, is there just weren't that many sockeye salmon. So really hard to film. Back in 2008, we saw the first real big amount of salmon who returned back from the Pacific Ocean all the way up to Redfish Lake, which is in central Idaho.
Mostly hatchery fish?
Most of them are still hatchery fish. As a matter of fact, this year I think about just a little over 300 were actually natural spawning sockeye salmon, but 1,100 was total. So the majority of them were hatchery, and that's, I guess, the what's being called into question is, what is going to be recovery? Is it going to? Are we taking the full number of those that are returning to Redfish Lake, or are we taking the naturally born and bred? And
so
of course,
you'd be
they have
looking at that issue of what is recovery and
what is recovery. Yeah, and we've talked to a lot of interesting people along the way on what they say. And recently, just earlier this month, I returned from the Columbia to see some of these big federal hydroelectric dams and how they are dealing with salmon. And in many cases, there are still some dams that don't allow fish passage. So what are we doing? We're spending millions of dollars to either truck them or barge them around these dams. So it's an issue that quite literally these fish are here because of us, but they're in this predicament because of us. So it should be a very interesting, and it's set to air on Outdoor Idaho in July. In
July. Well, we'll look for that. And as we wrap up, Eric, very briefly, a question came in via email on the Clearwater Collaborative, which is up in your area. Question is, does it have a chance of success, and what would that success look like? These are collaborative projects between environmentalists and others in the logging industry, and it's moving forward, as I understand. It's being used as an example by the U.S. Forest Service.
Yes, I think it's already shown signs of success. The process isn't done yet, but this summer, really for the first time, one of their projects will hit the ground. It's a restoration project that does include logging, so there'll be jobs in the woods, there'll be jobs at mills, and the other jobs that those produce. But the talks continue. Environmentalists are certainly hoping to get a wilderness proposal out of it. And it remains to be seen. That's a real tough sell for some of the participants. So it remains to be seen if that will happen.
But we will be seeing some projects on the ground, and we've got only about 20 seconds left. But Rocky, your thoughts on this? You've covered the collaborative as well.
Well, it's been a big success. It's got the Forest Service. It's driving the Forest Service nationwide. It's been a success. They just finished rules based on collaboration, and they're going to use the Clearwater Nez Perce as one of their first ones.
All right, well, ending on a positive note there, we are going to continue this discussion on our Web Extra. So we've got the lines full, which is great, and we've got some more issues to cover. So I hope you'll go to our website, idahoptv.org, and click on the Web Extra tomorrow. Also, if you're streaming this live, you can watch the Web Extra live. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. I want to thank my panel of environmental reporters, Rocky Barker, Kimberlee Kruesi, Aaron Kunz, and Eric Barker up north. You've been listening to Dialogue. Thank you.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. Check out our website, like us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.